And now here again is our guest, Dr. Calvin Miller. Dr. Miller, wonderful message. You began with the question why people go to church. They're hurting, and they want to feel some words of comfort.
Yeah. I'm convinced that people are just hurt. Almost all of us, if we get real honest, have blah days. You know, we all get up and we don't feel like the world's really been all that great to us. But there are other times, and many times, we go to church, we go out into the world, and we're just torn apart on the inside. And sometimes there are things we can't tell other people. We can't discuss it. And what do you do with that? And I believe people want a place where they can go where at least the proposition that God loves them is welcome.
And then how do we move into the next step of being concerned with the suffering of others, the reduction of human suffering around the world?
You know, Madeleine L'Engle's a real good friend of mine, and she says there's only one miracle, and it's the incarnation, the idea that God would become a human being. And I truly believe, Lydia, the same thing is true with us, that perhaps the great miracle is when you find someone who loves Christ enough that they'd like to be Christ for someone else. I'm always talking about when you really can't get someone else together with God, if you can just play God, if you can be God in touching them or caring about them.
Now, discern the difference for us, this feel-good spirituality that pervades so much of our congregational life these days. How can we see through that to a faithful and authentic understanding of Christ's mandate?
I think it begins in something as simple as the amount of time we spend with Christ. I often have the feeling that this feel-good religion comes from a kind of mood that we talk ourselves into. Maybe we go to church and everybody's rah, 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 Jesus, and so we talk ourselves into that. And I don't think that's very lasting. I think it's very fleeting. But I think the person who tries to get into the depths of God, who hungers to know Christ on a better relationship, the few times I've been separated from my wife for any length of time, I have an immense desire to see her again. I think there's something like that operates about Jesus, that we love him a lot, and because we're not able to see him physically, we have this immense hunger, and it's that hunger that produces the reality that causes us to care.
You have said that your primary rule for life is that time is a gift, and I was wondering how in your amazingly busy life and your career as a writer, poet, pastor, seminary professor, how have you been able to find time in your life for your family and children?
Well, you know what really helped me with this was Anne Morrow Lindbergh's great book. She said that when she and Charles Lindbergh were going to fly across the Pacific, in those days planes were very small and the Pacific was very wide, and they had to sort through what they could take on the flight. And she said we sorted. She spent our days sorting through things, throwing out things that were heavy and unimportant, and we kept the things that were light and necessary. And I think that's what most people do. I think as a pastor and professor, I want to love my students and help them. And so I have to sort. I have to prioritize what gets my time, because time truly is a gift.
I must ask you in a final moment, the title of your new book is the same as today's sermon, Into the Depths of God. Tell us about it.
Well, it all came about when I didn't really get to explain this on the telecast, but it all came about in Australia when I was at the Great Barrier Reef, and I saw the ocean as very, very broad, but I actually had to come to the place when I realized that while the Great Barrier Reef is very beautiful, the ocean is not deep enough there for a ship. Ships have to have a little depth to float, and so do our lives.
Wonderful metaphor. Calvin Miller, you also are interested in medieval mystic writers as food for thought, with the mind of a poet yourself. Tell us about those names.
Well, there's some wonderful names, but my favorite is probably Julian of Norwich.
Julian of Norwich, all is well. We'll have to pick up on that later.